Hello and welcome to the Cyberden, your weekly dose of tech and games. I, Jake, will be chatting with professional first-person shooter video game reviewer Gareth Robinson, better known as Gmanlives of YouTube. Thanks for coming, mate.
No worries, thanks for having me on, it's awesome.
Now, Gareth, please tell everyone listening about some of your earliest, fondest memories playing video games.
Oh god, earliest fondest memories. I can remember, this is going back a bit, but I can remember sort of playing with my parents' Atari system way back in the day. I probably couldn't have been older than probably 4 or 5 at the time. But I think it was pretty much when we got our first PC when, that was kind of the point when I knew this was something I was going to be at least hooked on. Do you know what I mean? For the rest of my life. The first kind of game I can remember vividly playing was Wolfenstein 3D. Which was, I don't know if anyone remembers it, playing it back then, but obviously back then, the tech was pretty advanced for the time. You look at it now and it's pretty basic, but back then it was kind of like it was a horror game because it had really kind of, realistic sound effects for the time, and looking back now, it's a little bit tame in comparison, but yeah, definitely playing that game. And I think it's safe to say I got nightmares from playing it back then, because I was probably a little bit too young to be playing it. I don't think my parents knew just exactly what the content of it was. I think if they knew that you were going around shooting, Nazis and mutants and German shepherds and stuff, they probably would have had a different reaction to it. But that's always the earliest gaming memory I think I have, which is kind of telling because FPS is kind of the thing that I'm, I guess, most hooked on. At least it's the genre that, I think I know back to front more than any other genre. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the earliest ones for sure, Wolfenstein 3D.
So what inspired you to create video game reviews, predominantly first-person shooter video game reviews? Are there any inspirations out there, perhaps?
I think like everybody, I saw the first sort of AVGN videos. Back then he was called, the Nintendo Nerd or something. Now it's just AVGN, I think. But I think a lot of people saw that, and you might not have known the games he was talking about, but I think on some level it kind of resonated because everybody has a lot of feelings about games that they played when they were younger that you might have thought, oh, this game was shit, this game was great. And I think something about that just kind of resonated in people. And I know that it was definitely kind of like an inspiration for me, not to do that kind of shtick, but definitely just to think, maybe I could have a stab at it and see how it goes. And there wasn't really anyone on YouTube back then who was doing just FPS games. I don't know if LGR was around back then. I think he was, because that guy's been on the internet since its inception. But no one just seemed to focus just on that. And at the time, I just kind of had a new PC. It wasn't a powerhouse, but it was good enough to edit on, and I had a lot of spare time because I was unemployed, and I'm trying to think what year it was. I think it was 2012, so yeah, that was kind of the year when the universe just kind of shat on me and everything went wrong, so I had a lot of spare time, and it just kind of came out of boredom, I think, more than anything else, so there are a few influences, but I think most of it was just the timing of life events and, just having an interest in what I was doing as well, definitely.
Would you say you're still big fans of the likes of the Angry Video Game Nerd and Lazy Game Reviews?
Yeah, absolutely. It's AVGN, I don't think he's quite as I don't know, I don't want to say good, but he's definitely changed a lot since those original videos. The old videos used to go for 5 or 6 minutes, and now he's doing these really long, epic videos, and he puts all this effort into it. But I think they're an influence, sure, but I think I try to not sort of watch other people's content too much because I don't really want to be copying what people are doing. I think I've got a pretty distinct style in the way I do my things, and I don't want to be that kind of guy, not that there's anything wrong with it, but, the person who's in front of the camera and they've got, the wall behind them with the 5,000 cartridges, and I just never really wanted to be that kind of person. I've tried it a couple of times in a few different videos, and it gets the same response as it would just get if it was just me talking for 10 minutes about a game. So, yeah, I mean, influence in the sense of I admire the workflow those guys have and the fact that they can pump such good content out. But in terms of the style, I don't think they're much influences anymore.
That's understandable. I don't think that your videos would be the same if you're spending about 10 or 15 minutes with some sort of shoehorned in plot about I've got to go save Christmas or oh no, it's the end of the world because this video game has grown legs and it's going to turn all the games bad. Oh yeah, and wait 15 minutes, folks. There is a really good story I wrote myself and I think there's a review in there somewhere. Just, trust me on that.
Yeah, it's I think a lot of the time too, like Angry Joe's another one too, where it seems it's almost more about the skits sometimes than it is about the the content of the game review. But then again, the guy's got like a bazillion subs, so he's obviously doing something right. So I shouldn't criticize.
Some people just enjoy reviews when people dress in silly hats and outfits, going, "I like to shoot guns," and then, "Oh yeah, the game's pretty bad. It kind of sucks." Subscribe, give me money.
It's probably it's not my style, put it that way.
So, after the release of the critically acclaimed shooter, Half-Life 2, now shooters in general were actually starting to become a lot more cinematic and linear. So what are your thoughts on games like these compared to shooters akin to Doom, Duke Nukem 3D, Quake, etc.?
That's a good question. I think it's a mindset thing. I like both styles. The thing too is that people say Half-Life 2 cinematic. I guess it is, but the thing is that you're acting out. If it's a movie, you're acting out the movie. I think that the problem with a lot of games, modern games now, is that you spend more time watching what's happening than engaging in it. Like that recent Wolfenstein game is a classic example where someone did a long play video and it's like 7 hours or 8 hours or whatever, and 3.5 hours of that is cinematics. Whereas if that was Half-Life 2, you're playing every moment of that. But I mean, I like both of them equally. Obviously, I grew up playing Doom and Quake, so that's what I think I prefer at the end of the day. At the moment, I'm replaying through the Heretic, the original Heretic game, which is obviously like a Doom clone as well. But I think as long as there's like a balance between gameplay and cinematics, I think it's fine. Recent examples, though, have shown that it can go the wrong way sometimes.
Would you say that shooters like Doom, Duke Nukem 3D, Quake, would you say that they are perhaps a bit more demanding from the player rather than go down corridor, shoot enemies, a bit of exploration, puzzle solving? Or would you say that perhaps, no, maybe the more linear sort of shooters can be a bit more challenging at times with its sorts of, quick time events and having to use cover to dodge bullets and attacks and things like that?
No, that's a good question. A classic example of this is I've got a friend of mine whose younger brother is like really into the Call of Duty games. He's only about, I think he's 17 or 18 now, but like you watch the kid play Call of Duty online and he's one of those people who'll just run around and he'll get 10 kill streaks and he'll just destroy everybody on the map. But we got him playing, I think it was Doom once, on Ultra Violence, and he just got his ass kicked. I think it's like a different set of... It's a different skill set, I think, as well. But those older games, there's no ifs or buts about it. They're way more challenging. They expect way more from the player. Talking about Heretic too, like the Hexen games that came after that, they're some of the most brutal first-person shooters I think I've ever played, because if you die in that game, it's entirely your fault. It's one of those games, and everyone compares it to Dark Souls. I think it's kind of similar in that regard, where if you don't know how to use everything that the game's giving you and you're not making full use of it, it's just going to punish you, and it's going to punish you over and over. Duke Nukem 3D is like classic in that example too, because there's so many like factors to consider in that. You've got, you've got all the different items, but just the level design and stuff is just. I'd love to see like a younger gamer go and play like Duke 3D these days and just see how they deal with some of the levels. Like, I think older gamers are going to play that and see like a vent shaft, for instance, and you're going to know, okay, I'm going to shoot the vent out and I can crawl through there, but I don't think this generation of gamers would probably know about that kind of level design. I think it's kind of dumbed us down a little bit in that sense. I know Total Biscuit did a video on that too, which goes for like an hour and a half or something, so I haven't watched all of it, but I think the gist of it's pretty strong in that it's definitely dumbing us down a lot, I think, in a lot of ways.
Then again, there are those sorts of developers who try and capitalize on 90s nostalgia. Not all of them are bad. I mean, I definitely like the look of games like Dusk, which looked freaking awesome. I'm still going to play that. But, it was like maybe a few years back when there was a rise in, these pseudo-retro first-person shooters, and then the journalists step in and say, it's just like Doom, and then you look at it and you think, no, it isn't. No, it's like Wolfenstein with shoehorned RPG elements.
Yeah, there was a few, there was kind of like a false renaissance for a bit, where Wolfenstein New Order, I think, was probably the game I guess that maybe kind of started that, because everyone's saying, oh, it's old school, it's returned to form, and it's old school in the sense that you've got a health bar and you can carry a bazillion guns, but there's nothing else old school about it. And I think the first big sort of mainstream game that did it right was when Doom came out last year. Obviously, it's in the hands of the guys who kind of created the genre, but it had the fast movement, it had lots of enemies, the big thing for me with those old school games is its projectile enemies. And people say I'm a bit of an idiot for just talking about this like obsessively, but that's the thing, man, is these projectile-based attacks is what separates all these modern games from the old ones. You play the modern games like the Call of Duties and Battlefields, and there's no real skill in it, you know what I mean? To surviving, it's just like you've got to shoot someone quickly to kill them. That's the skill. Whereas these old games are, if you've got the sort of, I guess, motor skills and the reflexes, you can avoid damage, and it's a bigger skill set. I think that's why arena shooters are still kind of popular, because it's a higher skill ceiling in those kind of games than it is in the Call of Duties and all that kind of stuff. If that makes sense.
On that topics, so about, say, multiplayer games, arena shooters, things like that, what do you personally prefer? Do you prefer them at top speed with, weapons scattered everywhere, or maybe you might like to play games which are a bit more cover-based, a bit slower, a bit more grounded, or maybe you like a bit of variety, a mix of old and new?
It's funny, I used to really be into Quake 3 multiplayer when it first came out, but I'm trying to think how old I would have been. I would have been 12 maybe when that game came out, so I had a lot of free time back then. Then after that, it was the first Counter-Strike game, which was what was 1.6. I don't know what it was originally called, but so I don't know. I kind of prefer both. I got into Quake Champions a little bit, but I was kind of let down a bit by the netcode, and gaming in Australia is always just going to be an absolute fight, just because of how horrible our internet is, and I've got just a bad internet connection. But I recently got into the recent Call of Duty even that came out. The World War II thing was pretty fun for a while, but again, like all Call of Duties, it just goes to crap after a few weeks because the dev support is just non-existent. But I definitely think I kind of prefer both of them, but I think, again, it just comes down to the game itself. Like, Quake 3 is great as a fast-paced shooter because it's so balanced. Like, every weapon, every vanilla map is just so well designed, and it's got all these really cool little layouts, and you know them like the back of your hand. But a lot of these kind of spin-off games, or not spin-offs, I guess, homage games that come out that are trying to do the same thing, they're not always, at the same kind of quality. So it's not so much the style, it's more so the execution of it, I guess, as well. But I could have it both ways. I'd probably prefer the slower shooting games, just because I don't think, I've got the time to kind of master the fast ones anymore. But I could have it both ways.
So which title would you say you've probably spent the most time on in multiplayer mode, be it co-op, competitively, split screen, or whatever?
You know what? Actually, the most multiplayer game I've ever played isn't actually an FPS. If it's an FPS, it'd be Counter-Strike without a doubt. I think there was a period where I was probably playing that. I'd get home from school, and we had dial-up internet connection back then, so you can imagine what that was like. I would probably get home 3:30, and I'd just play until like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And this would have gone on. It had to go on for years, I reckon, before it stopped. But other than that, it was World of Warcraft, man. When that game first came out, and I'd never played an MMO before that, so I had no tolerance to like MMOs or how addictive they could be. So that game absorbed 3 years of my life, the original. I lost a girlfriend, I lost a job to that game, and I almost dropped out of uni and failed uni because that's all I did. I think in the end it was would have been maybe 60-something days of game time on one of my characters, and I had, I'm trying to think how many characters. I had probably 4 or 5 characters on top of that, so yeah, that game is just that just destroys your life, that game. But amazing game otherwise, but yeah.
So let's talk about video game protagonists. Who are some of your favourites and why?
Jeez, man, that's a really open-ended question. I'd have to say, off the top of my head, if I'd saying FPS, you can't really go past Doom Guy. Outside of FPS, though it kind of still classically is FPS, probably Garrett from the Thief series. Just because, like, I'm a sucker for that, like, Thief with a Heart of Gold character. Like the sort of Captain Jack Sparrows and Han Solos. Just the character who's not only looks out for himself, but he still has those moments of empathy where he kind of cares about other people. Who else? Jeez, Max Payne's another cool character. I'm not too hot on the direction they went in the third game, but I don't think you can't not like that guy. He's just awesome. Yeah, geez, I don't know. There's so many of them, man. That's a really hard question. I don't know where to start. Yeah.
Maybe Duke Nukem thrown into the mix, I hope?
Yeah, you got to put Duke Nukem up there. He's pretty awesome. But again, like he's it's kind of a shame in that way because Duke's sort of a product of the '90s, whereas Doom Guy is always going to be Doom Guy. Duke 3D's kind of made from movie quotes from the '80s, and there's all the kind of macho stuff you get away with in the '90s, and everyone says he's not politically correct nowadays, which I don't agree with. But I don't know. He feels a bit dated to me now. He's a bit antiquated with his sunnies and his bleached hair and his muscles. Not that there's anything wrong with him, but he's kind of a product of his time now. So I think he's aged a little bit poorly, I should say.
I don't know. I still say there's probably some room for old Duke. Even though, of course, yeah, I get that he's a product, a mishmash of things like, Dirty Harry and Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, things like that. I get that he's definitely a product of the 90s, but I still say that he could probably, in the right hands, I still say he could probably work his way back into the limelight. I still say that there's a room for just awesome kind of protagonists with the awesome looks and ability to completely obliviate anything in his way and just look like complete cool dude cracking fun quips in the process.
I think in Nukem Forever too, I think they underplayed it, and I don't know if it was intentional, but I almost got like a vibe where everyone around Duke in that game was under the impression that he was a bit of a Fruit Loop, in the sense that he'd been kind of living this life where he was waiting for the aliens to attack again, and everyone just kind of looked at him as this like crazy old guy who's just, you know what I mean, hanging out in a casino waiting for aliens to attack. And there's like a line in the film where someone says something to him like, you put some body armor on or something, and Duke's response is like, armor's for pussies. I won't do the voice. And the character's response is just like, okay, man, cool, bro. Like, you know what I mean? Where everyone just kind of didn't know how to deal with it anymore. And I think that's the way you would have to take that character. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like a Demolition Cop type of thing, where it's this guy who comes from this, prehistoric era, basically, in terms of the social structure of things. And everyone doesn't know what the hell he is anymore. He's just this kind of strange relic that no one knows how to deal with. That's the way you got to take it, I think.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's kind of like he's just came back as if like out of a cryogenic freezer, and people are trying to get him to do it their way, basically. Trying to do it their way, but Duke's still a bit resilient. Hey, Duke, you got your power armor right here. Power armor's
yeah, that's it.
It's
It's the Master Chief armor joke, isn't it? That's right. I forgot about it.
Still, I still think that with Duke Nukem Forever, I still enjoyed it for what it was. I still say that the multiplayer kicks backside, in my opinion, but I still say that maybe there is a possibility. I mean, people have been saying, make a Duke Nukem game just like the Doom reboot. That would be awesome.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, it's worked. It worked wonders in Doom. You've got to play off its strengths and just take the things that resonate with the fans and just blow it out of proportion. And there's room in that in there for sure. Like, you don't really need to play with the enemy lineup. Just update the enemies. I'd even settle for them just doing like a remaster. Just do Duke 3D in a new engine or something. Just remake it. They did the Resident Evil remaster, and it was pretty much the exact same game, but they just added more puzzles, they improved the visuals, they fixed the controls. Just do that, bring it to a new audience, and bang, that's all you got to do.
Yeah, I still say that he's pretty flexible when it comes to different formats, really. I've heard talks that Randy Pitchford would have been okay with giving people like, what they're called, Slipgate Studios, they're called now, that used to be Interceptor, and said, yeah, we'll gladly cut you a deal on like some side-scroller Duke Nukem-style gaming, just like the old days. And I thought, that sounds pretty cool. He started off in two side-scrollers.
Yeah, well, the first game, I want to talk about vivid gaming experience as a kid. The first game was like one of the first shareware things I think we owned too. I can still remember finishing it for the first time, which is pretty big thing back then when you're a kid, and not really understanding what shareware was. So you finish the first episode and you fight Dr. Proton, and he blasts off into space, and then it says something like, to finish this you have to buy 2 other episodes. And when you're like 8 years old, you have no idea what the hell's going on. So that's that's another thing I can remember doing as a kid too.
Now, you've taken a few pot shots at certain video game protagonists and characters in your reviews in recent times, such as those seen in Mirror's Edge, Borderlands, etc., of which are usually branded as, social justice warrior-esque sort of games. So, in your opinion, what do you think they're doing wrong?
Can we limit it to a specific character? Is there one in particular that I can just talk about that you can remember me bringing up?
How about the writings of Anthony Birch in the likes of Borderlands 2, for example? I know that you were really critical of just the writing in general for that game.
Yeah, it's that's opening up a can of worms. The whole thing with the Borderlands game, and it's a recent example too of something that I could compare it to is I was reading Ready Player One, came out recently. And people were raving to me about this book, saying, "Oh, you got to read this book. It's full of like really cool '80s references." Because I'm pretty big on '80s movies, just because that's, I don't know. I think I grew up in the '90s, and you kind of look backwards when you're growing up, and so I was into Terminator and Commando and all those kind of games, obviously. And it reminds me a little bit of that, because every joke in Borderlands 2, it's not about it being a subtle joke. It's about like, bang, here's a reference to this, and bang, here's a reference to that. I mean, there's a mission in the game where you literally go into some sewer and you put a pizza down on a pedestal or something, and all these NPCs come out that have the names of the Ninja Turtles. And then after that, you fight an NPC named Splinter. There's nothing clever about that. It's just kind of stealing all the best bits of everyone else's work and kind of palming it off as your own. And it's kind of telling of the way that critics are, in the sense that they raved about that game and how funny it was and how hilarious it was. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. If people like playing it and they find it funny, that's fine. But I just didn't think it was very clever writing compared to the first game that just had this really sort of dark but also tongue-in-cheek tone towards its storyline. Like, it was really kind of violent and disturbing at times, but it was still kind of comedic, and it was original in that sense. It didn't just borrow story elements from every little thing it could poke a stick at. The thing about Anthony Birch too is that I don't want to rag on the guy more than he's already been ragged on, but I think his life is a little bit mixed up, and I think that kind of translated across in the writing, because thematically it was just all over the place. Like, you'd have really bizarre dialogue where, you know, he's talking about farting or something about a unicorn. A few cutscenes later, there's someone getting, you know, murdered, shot in the chest, and it's a really serious scene. And I always get thrown off by tonal imbalance like that in writing. Like, if it's going to stick to a theme, stick to a theme. Again, going back to that Wolfenstein game, that was the biggest problem with that for me, was that 1 minute it's really dark and it's like, this is domestic abuse and there's racism and there's murder and there's torture. And then, you know, the next scene is literally characters, like a guy talking about how much of a shit he wants to take. You know what I mean? So I think the writing in that Borderlands game, to try and bring it back again, I don't know, it just... The people that we're trying to appeal to weren't the people, I think, who had played the first game, if that makes sense. And when you're making a sequel, I don't know, I felt it should have been a bit more consistent. And the fact, too, that one of the characters was his sister, I think, Ashley Birch. The character is literally, I would say, just written in there for her, is a little bit telling, too. But in terms of the social justice side of things, I don't really have too much of an issue with it. I don't like in games when characters feel the need to announce their sexuality. Like, if it comes up in a storyline, that's fine. But there's dialogue in that game, I think it's in the second one, where someone just says something like, "Oh, by the way, I'm gay," or something like this, and it's, yeah, I don't know, like, I'm not sort of homophobic or anything, but I feel that it should come up naturally in a story. It shouldn't need to be shoehorned in, and that's the problem with the writing in a lot of those games, is it's always shoehorned in the cringiest way possible. So that's my biggest issue with it, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think, like I say, you're right, though, of course. I agree when I say that I got nothing against a bit of diversity here and there in video gaming. It's just how they deliver it. Again, Borderlands 2 is a pretty poor example, because it's just like stumbling across a person saying, "Oh, by the way, my boyfriend, did I mention I have a boyfriend? Yeah, I am bi after all, and I did have a boyfriend." Yeah, dude, just give me the quest. You see, because it's like with just protagonists in general. A dull generic female protagonist is not better than a dull generic male protagonist. They're both just as bad as one another, and critics won't seem to point this out because they're both generic.
Absolutely. There was a character, I think it was in the pre-sequel, and that's actually an even better example, because I know Birch wrote some of that, and I think the Aussie team that worked on it wrote another bit. And the contrast between what the Aussies have obviously written is so, like, vastly different, man. Like, the Aussie stuff is just hilarious. It's just dumb, wacky quests where you're dealing with NPCs who, like, an NPC who's, like, really drunk and he slurs his speech. Then you've got an NPC who just shouts all his dialogue because it's supposed to be funny because he's shouting. And then you talk about, like, that other character. There's a character who you do, like, 2 or 3 quests with her. And I think she probably mentions her sexuality maybe 4 or 5 times. There's a bit when another character hits on her and she's like, "Oh no, I'm into chicks," and then she's talking to, what's the female siren character, the main one? Can't remember her name. Lilith. I think she's talking to Lilith, and Lilith says something to her, and then this chick goes, "Oh, you have a really cute voice. Good thing I'm into chicks," or something along those lines. You know what I mean? And it's just blatant, and it's pandering is what it is. But like I said, again, it's trying to appeal to the wrong demographic. They're not the demographic who are going to buy and support your game. which is why ultimately I think people kind of shit on those games nowadays.
People have been doing the same thing with just game journalists in general. They've been catching quite a bit of flack in recent times as well, and personally, rightly so, for some of their reviews and editorials. And, well, I thought that you're a game reviewer, albeit YouTube only. Why do you think this is the case? Why do you think people are getting alienated by modern mainstream reviewers?
I have a lot of theories on this. I think the biggest thing is that modern game critics, they don't want to play games. I think and not all of them, I'm not trying to shoehorn them into one sort of category, but I think the vast majority of journalists don't want to play games. That's why, again, bringing it back to Wolfenstein, beating the dead horse, but that game got rave reviews, man. Like, it's got 9s out of 10. I think the rating on Metacritic's like 89 or 90 or something. It's pretty high. And the reason for that is, in my theory, is because it's a game that is, as I said before, 3.5 hours worth of cinematics. They like something. That's why The Last of Us 2, I think, rates so high, because there's so many moments in that game where they can just sit back and feel like they're playing a game, but they're not. You know what I mean? And they can feel intelligent because it's like a story and there's all these different themes it's dealing with. And again, that's another game that has difficulty modes that, like, you know, my grandfather could finish me. It's a game that toddlers could finish on the easiest setting. I think that's kind of telling now is that there is a massive disconnect. That another good example was when Cuphead came out, and I only think that got good reviews because journalists knew they had to give it a good score. Does that make sense? Like, not in the sense of like they played it and they enjoyed it, because I enjoyed that game from start to finish. It kicked the shit out of me, but I loved it. I think they just said, oh, this is a good game because it's hard, not because they enjoyed it, just because, you know, they have to say it's good. So it's definitely becoming a bigger gap now, just in, I don't know, maybe because there's more stories about it, it's just coming to light. But you go and watch all those old reviewers from GameSpot back in the day. What's the guy's name now who runs Giant Bomb, Jeff something or other? All the guys who used to do the original video reviews for GameSpot, and it's a completely different crowd. You know, there's guys who are into Nintendo Switch. I don't even know if they're into I don't even know if they played a lot of the old games, so I don't know where the basis of their sort of reviews comes from anymore. But look, it's a massive disconnect, and I think it's only going to get bigger. I don't think it's going to change, if anything.
If I were to use an allegory to compare modern mainstream reviews to, say, YouTube reviews like yours, I suppose it's kind of like music. You know, some people like the top 40 charts, but other people on the other end of the spectrum might say, this just lacks substance. This is why I like, say, heavy metal. I think that's how I see the world of video game reviews. Sometimes you might like the stuff that's always shoved in your face, but sometimes you might want to dig around a little bit and discover some actual proper good content.
Yeah, look, the thing about YouTube reviewers too, I think, is, I'll throw myself in the mix, like, we've got nothing to lose. Angry Joe, like, let's use him as an example. Total Biscuit 2 said a lot of shit in the past that, you know, clearly doesn't care what people think about him. Jim Sterling too, I'm not a big fan of Jim Sterling, but the guy's got some serious cojones with what he said about games. Like, they've got nothing to lose. Whereas these game critics, the so-called journalists, they have to adhere to, you know, kind of policies, I guess, when they talk about games. So maybe they can't be as, they have to be a little bit more restrained. But YouTubers, they can say whatever they want. And I've had this a few times in the past when I've said something about a game and someone will comment on it and say, I can't believe you said this. That's so unprofessional for a game journalist. And I said, mate, I'm not a game journalist. I'm some Aussie just making stupid videos about FPS games or whatever I'm talking about. I'm not a professional. That's the beauty of what we're doing, is that we can just say whatever the hell we want. I don't want to act like we're rebels or renegades, but it's kind of cool in that sense that you can just have an unfiltered response to something that you play. And that's why I think a lot of people have, if you ask, take 10 people off the internet who are gamers and ask them who their favorite reviewers are, I guarantee you 9 out of 10 are going to be people on YouTube. Very few of them are going to say, oh yeah, IGN's my favorite, or GameSpot, or Kotaku. Fuck, if they say Kotaku, just never talk to them again for the rest of your life. Because they know when they're going to watch those videos, whoever's done it, that person's coming from a place of, okay, I just played this game, I spent my own time and money doing it, this is what I think. And that's, if anything, like I said, the disconnect between journalists and the real gamers is just going to get further and further as everyone starts to realize that these mainstream journalists often just talking out their asses.
Let's talk about video game mods. You've dipped in some pretty nifty mods here and there. I'm sure you're a firm believer that sometimes the fans can make something better than the developers.
Yeah, I mean, not so much better, but I think they can definitely improve upon it. Like Brutal Doom is kind of the classic example. I think if Brutal Doom never got made, I think the modding scene would be a lot more boring. I think people have kind of had a look at that and seen, I guess it kind of opened people's eyes. Before Brutal Doom, and I've never been that hardcore into the modding scene, but I've always kind of dipped my toes in it. It always just seemed to be kind of map packs and total conversions, but things that really kind of dynamically change the mechanics of a game. Like, it's just kind of turned it on its head. It's funny too, I was just before we did this interview, I was playing Brutal Heretic, and talking about Heretic again. And Heretic's not a bad game, but it's always been a Doom clone. And then playing through this Brutal mod, which has kind of just done what Brutal Doom did to Doom. It's just sort of upped everything, turned the dial up to 11, Spinal Tap reference. And it's like I'm playing a different game. And I sat there playing it all over. I think I played it for about 2 hours straight. And I'm just like, it's like I'm playing it for the first time again. But it's like a different game because everything's changed so much. I think the potential there is just, it's gigantic. And the fact too that these mods are free. You're not really wasting dough to kind of go and play a mod. You know what I mean? And a lot of the best mods out there are the standalone ones that are on. Some of them are on Steam. I mean, it's a good way to just keep that shelf life going for games for sure.
And then you get mods like Moonman.
Yeah. Funny thing is though, I've got to say, and Moonman is still supremely entertaining. If you're the type of person who doesn't ever stick up their ass and doesn't get too offended by everything, like the people that are on BuzzFeed and Kotaku, like that is the most hilarious Doom mode you can possibly play. Apart from Hentai Doom, that's the other one that's funny as well.
So how does the development process for each review of yours go down, and how much time do you have to put into each of these?
It kind of depends. Like it obviously it differs from game to game. From the start, like when I started doing them like 5 years ago, or whatever, I always said that I would finish the game. So I always just wanted to at least have finished, the game from start to finish. So if it's a really big game like Fallout, say, or, Elder Scrolls, I'm going to at least kind of finish the main storyline, maybe spend a bit more time coming to grips with all the mechanics. So I always wanted to kind of have a basis of what I was talking about. In terms of picking games, when I started, I had hundreds of games I could talk about. So it was just like, almost like scratching my chin. And it's like, oh, there's that game, and there's that game. You know what I mean? Like you go through Doom and Quake and Half-Life and Blood and then all those classics. Nowadays, it's definitely slowed down a little bit because I'm getting to that point where the games that I want to review now are games I haven't played. Do you know what I mean? Back then, everything I was talking about, I'd played it since I was 10 years old or whatever, or 14 years old. So I knew it like the back of my ass, if I can say that. So moving ahead, it's become a lot more trickier. So a lot of the times now, it's more like recommendations, or it's I might be thinking about a game and then somehow it just clicks. It's not something that I kind of spend a lot of time with, but it would be like, oh yeah, I really wanted to check this game out. And because I'm an adult and I've got disposable income, I can hop on eBay and just buy it now. I bought the Punisher game for the PC recently, which people have been telling me to play forever. And I never played it when I was young because I couldn't talk my parents into buying it. So I had to buy it off eBay, and it's like $150 or something because it's just this, like, there's no copies of it anywhere. So it was really expensive. And then I played it, and it's awesome. And I don't know if it's awesome that I'm playing it now because I never played it back then, but it's kind of refreshing too when people recommend you these games and they're actually good games. Because a lot of the time, if I'm just playing them and I've never played them before, they could be shit. And I might not know that, so I've kind of wasted all this time. But recommendations is where 99% of them are coming from. And like I said, it just depends on the game. If it could be 5 or 6 hours, or it could be 20 or 30 hours. I mean, I did a video on the Resident Evil series, and that took me, I don't know, each game is like 5 or 6 hours each, and editing and typing the script out, so probably 50-something hours on the script and the video, all up.
So what have been some of your favourite reviews that you've worked on? Were there any particular ones that were horrendously difficult to make?
The bad games are difficult to make only because they're difficult to play through. So definitely those ones. Any game that is short is hard to do as well because it's really hard to find stuff to talk about. I mean, classic example is that recently one I did was for Viet Cong 2, and the original game was really good. And I'd heard the second one was bad, so I went in there with this expectation, and it was bad, man. Like, it just, mechanically, it controls like garbage, and it was a real struggle to the point where I did a collab thing with a friend of mine. I said, mate, look, I'm struggling to play this game. Do you want to, do a double review so we can both type up a few pages, and it saves us trying to type up, all the stuff myself. Horrendously bad, what was that? What was the second question about horrendously bad what?
Were there any reviews that you did that were maybe just horrendously difficult to make?
Oh, yeah. No, like I said, just games that are bad to begin with are always tricky. There was a few games where I'd been gifted things as well. I'm not going to name names or sort of shame the game, but yeah, there was a few things where I just did it just because the game was gifted, and I didn't like playing it at all, but I felt like I had like a responsibility because someone spent their money to give me the game. So now it gets to the point where if people try to gift me games, I flat out say to them, I don't want to play this game, don't send it to me, and I like decline the gift because I just don't want to have to worry about it.
So, any favourite reviews you've made?
Not really. To be honest, this might sound a little bit weird, but once I upload a video, I don't think I ever watch them. I mean, I might just skim through it to make sure it's loaded properly, but I rarely kind of go back and watch them again. Maybe, I'm trying to think of ones that I kind of enjoyed doing. Anything that's like old school, I like doing. I think I enjoy working on, obviously, the games that I enjoyed playing the most. Probably the Half-Life 2 video I'm pretty happy with, because I think I said a lot of what I wanted to say, and considering there's so much stuff going on in that game, I feel like I covered a lot of the bases. Similar with the Fallout 3 New Vegas reviews. I like what I got to say in those, and they seem to have had a really good response because they've got, I think, some of the most views on my channel. But like I said, any game that I enjoy playing always seems to be a better review in the end.
Let's use this time to perhaps give some advice to all your fans out there, in case there are any who are listening in and thinking, you know what, I want to be a video game reviewer on YouTube as well. So what kind of advice would you give these people?
Just start doing it. I've had a few people message me in the past and send me their scripts and send me rough edits, and then I give them tips and I never hear from them again. Just start doing it. Like, if you want to do it, just do it. Editing is not hard. It really isn't hard. And I can tell you from even the big YouTubers out there who do it, like Angry Joe again, let's talk about him. The amount of effort that goes into doing what he does is absolutely piss poor. It's like first year film student stuff that he does with green screen. It's not hard. Total Biscuit's huge. Jim Sterling's pretty huge. They do pretty basic stuff as well. You just got to have the initiative to do it. And I think that's the problem, is that I think people just kind of want a quick fix, and they don't really want to sort of do the work and let it kind of take time to grow. Like, I mean, when I first started doing the videos, my first year I did it, I think I had like 600 subs. But if I enjoyed what I was doing, and I wasn't really doing it for any other reason than I like talking about games, and now I've got 20 followers, now I've got 30 followers, and find something that you like talking about and just talk about it. That's it. If you enjoy talking about it, then you'll say things that people are going to agree with. I think that's probably the best advice.
So outside of reviewing games, what are you doing with your life? Have you got any other hobbies, favourite bands or bits of music you like to listen to? Anything like that?
I'm not really big on modern music anymore. I like a lot of older stuff from like the 90s and the 80s. In terms of hobbies, I'm pretty big on just like weightlifting and fitness stuff in general. I figure if I'm going to be sitting at a computer for 4 hours a day playing games and doing reviews, I should be out for at least a couple of hours. I've got a pretty clean diet, so I think people are surprised when I talk to them about how much I'm into gaming, because people don't kind of associate that kind of lifestyle with gaming. But I think I'm just like any other guy, man. I like comics and I like watching movies and that kind of stuff. I dare say I'm into anime, but not recent anime. I like a lot of old school anime from like the 90s and stuff, like Ghost in the Shell and Ninja Scroll. And I'm just a normal dude. I think that's the main thing. That's the main takeaway. I'm just like everybody else.
And now it's time for the final question. The most important question right here in this interview. You like to refer to your fans as Sonny Jims. Where did you pick that up from?
Wow. All right. I've told this a few times, but I'll say it again. There's a couple places. The first thing is my dad. When my dad was angry with me, he would always say Sonny Jim. Just funny how I've like taken it as my own thing. Say I've just broken something. He's like, good job, Sonny Jim, like that. And then there was a character in Jumanji who says that he throws a sword at Robin Williams. It's like the hunting guy. And he's like, not good enough, Sonny Jim. And that, between me and my sister, when we watched that movie, we thought that was the funniest shit we'd ever heard. And then I had a teacher in high school who said that as well. He was similar age to my dad, which is probably pretty telling. And he just called everybody Sonny Jim. For similar emotions, when you're in the shit and somebody did something wrong, he just used to call people Sonny Jim. And I don't know when it started sticking in the videos, but I think people who watch the videos say it more than I do, because I don't even really say it that much, because I don't want it to be like, I don't know, it's kind of a bit old now, but I think it's more of a fan thing than it even is my thing anymore. But that's cool. I'm glad to have a thing, apart from being like that FPS guy.
Gareth, thank you so much for coming to this interview. It's been a blast.
No worries, man. It was real. Thanks for the chat.
Please take this time to shout out to your fans or to plug your content or whatever. The floor is yours.
If anyone's listening, go play some cool old school FPS. This is G-Man logging out. Peace.
And I'd like to thank my wonderful listeners out there for tuning into this great interview on the Cyber Den, your weekly dose of tech and games. See you later, Gareth. Thanks for coming, mate.
Cheers, bro.